The lecture hall was alive with restless chatter. Chairs scraped the floor, footsteps echoed, and the soft humming of phones being scrolled filled the space. Dozens of students filtered into the room with coffee cups in hand, laughing, yawning, exchanging last-minute notes. Amid the crowd walked Sophia. She didn't speak. Her steps were silent, steady, almost unnoticed, almost. Her presence, though quiet, was impossible to ignore. Dressed in modest clothes, with a plain white hijab wrapped around her head, she looked out of place in a sea of hoodies, crop tops, and tank tops. Some glanced her way with curiosity, others with mild irritation, and a few with open amusement. But she kept her gaze forward. She had learned not to respond. Sophia had come from a small town in Ohio, raised in a Muslim family that taught her dignity was louder than words. At this university, she quickly realized that silence wasn't always a shield. Every day she walked into class, she could feel the smirks, hear the half-said jokes. She had gotten used to being the hijab girl. But what no one knew was how much it burned inside. Today felt no different, until it did. She stepped into the massive lecture hall and took her usual seat near the middle. Not too far back, not too front. Just in the middle. It felt safe. The voices around her were familiar. Whispers from the row behind. There she is again. Another girl giggled. Still stuck in the 7th century. Sophia didn't turn around. She simply pulled out her notebook, pressed it open, and waited. Her heart was calm, but deep inside, something was boiling. Today wasn't going to be ordinary. She could feel it. The door at the front swung open, and a sharp silence fell over the room. Professor Anderson had arrived. He was a towering figure, well-dressed, silver hair, steel-framed glasses. There was something theatrical in the way he moved. Like he was always on stage. Famous across the campus for his brutal honesty, unapologetic challenges, and most of all, his disdain for religion. Especially Islam. He walked to the center of the room and placed a single sheet of paper on the podium. Then, without preamble, he began. Let's talk about myths. A chuckle rippled through a few students. He had their attention. Humanity has made enormous progress, he continued. Medicine, space travel, AI. And yet, millions are still clinging to ideas forged in deserts and caves thousands of years ago. Rituals. Rules. Fear of invisible beings. Sound familiar? Some students laughed. Others exchanged knowing smirks. Then he said it. Let's begin with Islam. There it was. Sophia froze. The air felt thicker now. Her eyes stayed on the desk, but she could feel dozens of heads turned toward her. She was the only visibly Muslim student in the room. Every whisper, every insult she had endured before, they all suddenly felt heavier. Professor Anderson paced slowly across the floor. Why do Muslims fast for an entire month? Why do they circle a black stone in the desert? Why do they memorize a book that contradicts itself? Why, in 2025, do people still kneel to a faith that limits their lives? The room stayed quiet, but the tension was unmistakable. Some were amused. Some curious. A few seemed uncomfortable. Sophia was still. Then something unexpected happened. Professor Anderson stopped pacing. He turned to face her, directly. He took 2 steps forward and gestured lightly toward her. Sophia, he said, his voice smooth, you wear that scarf every day. You follow the rituals I just described. Why? There was no mockery in his tone. Not this time. Just challenge. But it wasn't the words that caught the room off guard. It was what he did next. He walked over to where she was seated and, without warning, reached out, not forcefully, but softly, toward the edge of her hijab. He didn't pull it. He barely touched it. Just a symbolic graze. A gasp ran through the room. Sophia looked up, meeting his eyes. Her face didn't flinch. But her eyes said everything. There was sadness. There was resolve. And above all, there was strength. In that one moment, something in the room shifted. What was meant to provoke had instead created silence. The kind of silence that wasn't empty, but electric. Sophia stood. For the first time. Every eye was on her now. She didn't need a mic. Her voice, though soft, carried perfectly. You asked why Muslims fast? She began, her gaze steady. It's not starvation. It's not torture. It's healing. Fasting improves brain function, cellular repair, and emotional regulation. The body resets. The soul breathes. Islam introduced it not as punishment, but purification, 1,400 years before modern medicine caught up. No one moved. She continued, And Hajj? Circling the Kaaba? That's not idol worship. That's unity. Have you ever seen a stadium during the World Cup? Tens of thousands in one color, singing in sync, moving together. Because it makes them feel part of something. Hajj does the same, except deeper. No luxury seats. No elite. Just humans, equal before God. The professor narrowed his eyes, but didn't speak. Sophia took a small breath and raised her voice slightly. And the Qur'an? The book you call full of contradictions? It hasn't changed a letter in 14 centuries. In a world where laws change every election, that consistency matters. Have you read it? In its own language? Do you know it uses a literary structure no one has replicated? A rhythm that captures both meaning and emotion, unmatched in any scripture or speech? She paused. No one was laughing anymore. Not a single whisper. Just the soft ticking of the classroom clock in the background. Sophia sat down. But the air hadn't moved. Professor Anderson stared at her, arms crossed. His lips parted for a moment, then closed again. He had underestimated her. The mocking tone was gone. But the challenge? It wasn't over. He stepped forward again, this time more slowly. All right, Sophia, he said. His voice was quieter now, but colder. You gave poetic answers. But let's go deeper. He took a long breath and looked directly into her eyes. If your God is so loving, then why did he create hell? A stillness hung in the lecture hall. Sophia could feel the weight of every pair of eyes, the charged energy in the room. But she didn't flinch. Her fingers gently pressed against the cover of her notebook, as if grounding herself in the calm she carried. Professor Anderson tilted his head slightly. You just said your God is all-loving, he continued. So why hell? Why eternal punishment? Isn't that the opposite of mercy? His tone was careful, but the edge was sharp, meant to cut. Sophia didn't rush her answer. She stood once again, voice steady. Professor, do you believe that a just judge should let criminals go free? The question landed with a soft thud, surprising the professor. He raised an eyebrow. Well, of course not. Sophia nodded. Justice requires consequence. If someone steals, murders, or lies their way through life and faces no judgment, what kind of justice is that? We expect accountability in human courts. Why would we expect less from the one who created justice in the first place? A murmur swept the class, quiet agreement from unexpected corners. Hell, Sophia continued, is not the contradiction of love. It's the balance of it. Just like fire can destroy and also purify, hell exists for the same reason laws and prisons do, to uphold what's right. But, she paused, her voice softening, our God doesn't want to send people there. He offers mercy every day, every breath, every chance to return. But he also gives us free will. And free will means real choices. Real consequences. She let that sit. The professor pressed on, though his voice had lost some of its earlier bite. Fine. Then let's talk about women. You wear that scarf every day. I see women in your religion covering their bodies, limiting themselves. Isn't that oppression disguised as virtue? Sophia's jaw tightened slightly. She had heard this one too many times. But she responded with grace. Professor, do you believe women have the right to choose how they dress? Yes, he said quickly. Then why is it, she asked, meeting his gaze, that when a woman chooses to wear less, we call it freedom, but when she chooses to cover, we call it oppression? The professor blinked. Sophia stepped forward slightly, not with arrogance, but quiet resolve. The hijab isn't about shame. It's about choice. About dignity. About telling the world that I define myself, not my looks, not your approval, not society's gaze. I don't hide because I'm weak. I cover because I'm strong. The room was utterly still. Even the ones who had smirked earlier now looked thoughtful. She continued, Many of us wear it out of pride. Out of empowerment. Just like some wear a uniform in court or a badge on duty, it's identity. It's purpose. Real freedom isn't doing what everyone does. Real freedom is choosing your own path. There were no gasps this time. Just quiet respect. Professor Anderson crossed his arms, his posture a little less upright now. Then explain this, he said. If Islam is so fair to women, why do men get more in inheritance? Isn't that clear gender inequality? Sophia had been expecting this. On the surface, it looks unequal. But Islam doesn't assign based on privilege. It assigns based on responsibility. She paused and addressed the class more than the professor now. In Islamic law, men are obligated, legally and religiously, to financially support their families, their wives, children, even their sisters if needed. A woman, however, is not required to spend a single penny of what she inherits. What she receives is hers alone, no questions, no expectations. So yes, the portions differ, but so do the burdens. Islam doesn't give equal shares. It gives fair ones. A few students leaned forward, genuinely interested. Fairness, she added, doesn't always mean sameness. It means balance. And that balance is what Islam protects. The professor looked slightly unsettled now. He opened his mouth to speak, but closed it again. Sophia took the moment to gently shift the conversation. Professor, she said softly, you say the Qur'an is full of contradictions. But did you know that this same book contains truths science only recently confirmed? The class stirred. A few skeptical brows were raised. She explained, in the Qur'an, there are verses describing embryonic development, accurate stages of how a fetus forms in the womb. Long before microscopes. It mentions the expanding universe. The barriers between salt and fresh water in the sea. The way mountains act like pegs stabilizing the Earth's crust. Sophia's tone was not boastful, it was sincere. All of this was revealed to a man who could neither read nor write. In a desert. In the 7th century. The professor's silence said more than words. How? She asked. Could a man in that time describe facts no one knew? Facts confirmed centuries later? The Qur'an wasn't authored by him. It was revealed to him. And then, with gravity in her voice, she said, no one in 1,400 years has been able to replicate even a single chapter of it. Not in structure. Not in depth. Not in power. The class sat stunned. Even the projector at the front buzzed more loudly than the students now. Sophia sat down slowly. For the first time in the entire semester, the girl who was usually laughed at had silenced the entire room. Professor Anderson stood still for a long moment, his hands resting lightly on the podium. His eyes, which had once been full of fire, were now searching, quietly battling something within. He looked up, then said quietly, let's keep going. There was no sarcasm in his voice anymore. No smirk. Just curiosity. And maybe, something else. Something unsettled. He drew a slow breath, then walked forward again. If this religion is so rational, he asked, voice lower now, then why did it spread through war? A few students perked up. The tension returned, but this time, it wasn't pointed at Sophia. It was turned inward. People were starting to question what they thought they already knew. And Sophia was just getting started. Sophia looked directly at Professor Anderson. The question had been asked 1,000 times by critics, but always in tones dripping with accusation. Today, it sounded different. Not softer, but less certain. As though the professor himself was unsure whether the challenge was still his to throw or his to face. Islam spread by the sword, right? He repeated slowly. If it's a religion of peace, why is so much of its history filled with battles and expansion? Sophia remained seated for a moment, then stood again, not with defiance, but with composure. Professor, she began, have you ever asked that question about other empires? The Romans? The British? The Mongols? All of them expanded, and through war. But no one says Christianity spread by the British Empire's colonization, even though churches followed their armies everywhere. She let the point settle. Islam did engage in wars, yes. But here's the part most people don't know. The majority of Muslim-majority countries today were never conquered by any Islamic army. Take Indonesia, the world's largest Muslim population. Not a single sword reached its shores. Islam came through traders. Honest merchants. Their character, not their weapons, converted millions. A student in the front nodded slowly, surprised. Sophia continued. The Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, had every opportunity to force people, but he didn't. In fact, the Qur'an says, there is no compulsion in religion. People embraced Islam not out of fear, but because they saw justice, equality, and spiritual truth. She took a short breath. If Islam had spread solely by force, it would have collapsed when its political power did. But 1.9 billion people still hold on to it, even under persecution. That's not the legacy of a sword. That's the legacy of sincerity. Professor Anderson didn't interrupt this time. He paced a little, arms crossed, his expression unreadable. Fine, he finally said. Let's talk about minorities. If Islam is so just, why do non-Muslims in Muslim countries suffer discrimination? Why are they treated like second-class citizens? Sophia's eyes didn't waver. You're right to ask that. Some Muslim-majority countries today fail to protect minorities. But Professor, let's separate Islam from governments. Corruption is everywhere, and Islam condemns it everywhere. She leaned forward slightly. Do you know that Jews and Christians lived peacefully under Muslim rule in Spain for centuries? That Baghdad once had synagogues, churches, and mosques side by side, when Europe was deep in religious wars? Do you know that the Prophet himself signed treaties guaranteeing safety to Christians and allowed Jews to live according to their own law? A pause. Then she added, if today's rulers break that trust, that's on them, not on the religion they betray. A few students looked at each other, processing the distinction. Professor Anderson exhaled slowly. All right then. If Islam is so protective, why can't Muslims even enjoy simple pleasures like a glass of wine? Why so many restrictions? Isn't that a prison, not a faith? Sophia smiled faintly. Professor, let me ask, how many people die each year because of alcohol? How many children suffer abuse? How many families collapse? How many accidents happen because someone thought a glass of wine was harmless? Silence. In 2023, the WHO confirmed that no amount of alcohol is safe for health. But Islam said this 1,400 years ago. She looked around the room. Alcohol dulls judgment, removes control, and damages society. Islam isn't against joy. It's against harm. And real joy comes from clarity, not intoxication. The room was still. Even those who drank now looked uncomfortable. Professor Anderson rubbed the back of his neck. So Islam knows everything? That's the claim? No, Sophia replied. Islam doesn't claim to know everything. But it claims that the one who sent it does. That's the difference. A student in the second row, the same girl who had giggled earlier, now raised her hand slightly. Can I ask something? Sophia turned to her, surprised. The girl hesitated, then asked, Why is it such a big deal to draw your prophet? I mean, it's just art, right? Sophia's expression softened. This wasn't mockery, it was curiosity. The kind that deserved a real answer. It's not about a picture, Sophia said. It's about love. You see, for Muslims, the prophet isn't just a historical figure. He's our teacher, our guide, our beloved. Depicting him risks reducing him to an image, and worse, to ridicule. Would you laugh at someone's mother in a cartoon? Their child? Their pain? If not, then why laugh at their faith? The girl blinked. Sophia continued gently. Freedom of expression matters, yes. But freedom should never become freedom to wound. Real freedom includes respect. And some things are too sacred to mock. The professor cleared his throat, walking slowly across the floor. All right then, let's talk about your prophet himself. If he was so noble, why did he marry so many women? Isn't that questionable? The words were carefully chosen to sound academic, but the implication was clear. Sophia didn't hesitate. Let me ask you, if a man today married many young women for pleasure, would he choose widows? Older women? Poor, abandoned mothers? She waited. The room stayed silent. The prophet's marriages weren't about desire. They were about protection. Social alliances. Teaching the community how to care for the marginalized. Most of his wives were widows. Many were over 40. Only one was a young virgin. His first wife was 15 years older than him, and he stayed with her for 25 years. Sophia looked directly at him. No one blames kings or presidents for marrying many times. But the prophet's every action is judged, because he claimed to be guided. And yet, if you study the context, every marriage had a reason that helped build a society. Professor Anderson didn't respond. His arms had dropped to his sides. His face was no longer confrontational, just thoughtful. The classroom had changed. Sophia sat down again, her voice no longer loud, but firm. Every question has an answer, Professor. The only thing that needs to change is whether people are willing to hear it. A long silence followed. Then the professor said slowly, You've answered well. He didn't smile. But something in his voice had shifted. Less cold. Less commanding. Something unsure was brewing beneath the surface. But he wasn't done. Last question for today, he said, almost reluctantly. Islam claims to respect choice. But why does it punish people who leave it? If someone leaves the religion, why should they be threatened? Isn't that tyranny? The room braced itself again. But Sophia didn't look shaken. She just looked ready. The moment the question echoed across the room. Why does Islam punish apostates? The atmosphere tensed again. For all the calm Sophia had brought, this question carried heat. The class held its collective breath. Some students leaned forward. Others frowned, as if waiting to catch her in a contradiction. But Sophia sat quietly for a few seconds, thinking, not to stall, but to weigh her words carefully. When she finally rose, her voice was calm, but firm. Professor, she began, apostasy is often misunderstood, both by those outside Islam, and even sometimes by those within. Islam does not punish people for privately changing their beliefs. There is no Islamic police that storms into hearts. What it addresses is public betrayal during times of war, treason disguised as faith. The professor raised an eyebrow, so Sophia explained further. In the early Islamic state, rejecting Islam wasn't just a personal choice, it was often an act of political rebellion. People would accept Islam to spy, gain military access, then renounce it publicly to incite enemies and destroy unity. It was never just disbelief, it was treachery. Just like modern countries punish treason. She paused. Even today, if a citizen gives state secrets to an enemy during wartime, what happens? Courts try them. Some even face execution. So why is it tyranny when Islam, 1,400 years ago, had similar laws for similar acts? A long silence followed. No one had expected the comparison. Some students nodded slowly. Others sat back in their chairs, thinking harder. Sophia added, "And let me be clear, Islam never supports forcing faith. The Qur'an says there is no compulsion in religion. Faith that's forced is not faith at all. If someone stops believing in their heart, that's between them and God. But if someone declares war through that disbelief, using it to attack the community, then, like any nation, Islam has the right to respond." Professor Anderson didn't argue. He only looked at her for a long, unreadable moment. Sophia's chest rose slowly as she exhaled. She could feel the classroom softening. Not entirely convinced, perhaps, but shaken. She had dismantled enough stereotypes to open cracks where curiosity could finally slip through. The professor turned slowly and walked toward the board. "All right," he said quietly, as if speaking to himself. "Then tell me this." He turned back toward her. His voice lowered, serious now. "Why can't Islam modernize? Other religions evolved. They adjusted. Why is Islam still chained to 7th century rules and desserts?" Sophia didn't need to rise this time. She simply straightened her shoulders, sitting with calm dignity. "Professor," she said gently, "do you believe truth changes with time?" He hesitated. "Sometimes, yes. And other times?" "Well, some truths are universal," he admitted. Sophia nodded. "Islam claims to be built on those universal truths. That there is one creator. That humans have dignity. That justice must be upheld. That family is sacred. That wealth should be shared. These aren't 7th century ideas. These are timeless. What Islam doesn't change isn't culture, it's values. What can change is how those values are applied in different times." She continued, "Islam encouraged scholarship, science, and innovation. But it warned not to modernize truth to suit our desires. Because the moment truth becomes flexible, it stops being truth." The professor didn't respond. His lips parted slightly, but no words came. His arms folded again, this time not in defiance, but in self-protection. The way people do when they're trying to hide the tremor under their skin. Sophia added softly, "You ask why Islam didn't reform like Christianity. But Islam didn't suffer the same corruption. There was no pope selling forgiveness, no monarchy burning scientists. Islam preserved its text, its prayer, its law. If there was no disease, why perform surgery?" Some students looked stunned. Others, deeply thoughtful. The shift was unmistakable now. The lecture was no longer a debate. It had become a confrontation with everything they had assumed was true. And Professor Anderson? Something inside him was clearly unraveling. He took a step back, slowly sinking into the edge of the desk behind him. For the first time, he looked human. Not intellectual. Not powerful. Just a man. A man whose beliefs were suddenly full of holes. Then Sophia said something that pierced even deeper. "Professor," she began, "many people judge Islam by the worst of Muslims. But we don't judge a medical school by its failed students. Or a constitution by corrupt politicians. You'll never understand Islam by watching those who don't follow it. You'll only understand it by reading its source, with sincerity." A student in the back whispered something to his friend. Another wrote something quickly in their notebook. The room was breathing differently now. Sophia added, "The Qur'an challenges its readers. It says if you are in doubt, produce a chapter like it. But no one has. Not in content. Not in structure. Not in message. And then, with almost painful honesty, she said, I don't expect you to believe everything I've said today. But I do ask one thing, read. Not blogs. Not biased books. Read the Qur'an. Read it with an open heart. Not to find flaws, but to search for truth. The professor looked down. His hand pressed gently against his own chest, as if feeling for something he couldn't name. Then, slowly, almost in a whisper, he asked, Why didn't anyone explain it like this before? Sophia didn't answer. She just looked at him. Her eyes no longer filled with defense, but with mercy. Mercy for a man who spent years mocking what he had never understood. The class sat frozen. Not a phone vibrated. Not a cough, not a whisper. Just stillness. And then the professor, with visible effort, said, I thought I understood religion. I thought I saw it clearly. But now... He looked up, his voice trembling. Now I'm starting to think. I've been blind. He stood up again, but this time not as a professor, not as a critic. Just as a man, searching. I want to read the Qur'an, he said. Sophia stayed still, her hands folded in her lap. I want to know, he added. Not to argue. Not to disprove. Just to know. A few students audibly gasped. One girl in the front had tears in her eyes. The moment had arrived. The man who had once challenged the foundation of her faith now stood at its door. And yet, this was not the end. It was only the beginning of something none of them had expected, especially Sophia. No one spoke. The man who had, for years, filled halls with loud dismissals of faith now stood in total stillness, eyes lowered, hands trembling at his sides. Professor Anderson looked around the room, as if seeing his students for the first time. But it wasn't their faces he was really seeing. It was something deeper. The reflection of his own long-held pride cracking apart. Sophia remained seated. She didn't smile. She didn't move. Because she understood something now, this wasn't victory. This was vulnerability. And vulnerability deserves gentleness, not applause. I want to read the Qur'an, he had said. He hadn't just meant the book. He meant everything, the beliefs, the language, the light that had challenged his darkness. A silence hung in the air like a thread suspended between two hearts, his, breaking, and hers, wide open. Finally, Sophia spoke. I'll bring you one, she said softly. But you must promise not to read it with anger or fear or pride. Only with an open heart. He nodded, swallowing hard. That's all I have left. From the corner of the room, a student raised his hand slowly. It was Marcus, tall, loud, a regular in every joke Sophia had endured in the past. But his voice was small now. Sophia, he said, can you help me too? I want to know what you know. A gasp passed through the back rows. Not in mockery, but in awe. Then another voice, a girl this time. Chloe. The one who had once laughed the loudest when Sophia first stood up in class wearing a hijab. I don't know if I'm ready for religion, she said. But I want to understand. You made me feel something today I didn't expect. Like maybe faith isn't blind. Sophia turned slowly toward them. Her eyes, which had once absorbed the weight of their cruelty, now held nothing but softness. I'll help all of you, she said. But only if you're sincere. The room shifted. The energy no longer belonged to a debate. It belonged to something much rarer, transformation. Professor Anderson looked at her again, blinking fast, as if holding back a flood behind tired, aging eyes. I've spent decades mocking people like you, he said. Wrote books. Gave talks. Made fun of faith. Especially Islam. And I never once, Never once stopped to think maybe I was wrong. Sophia didn't respond with a quote, or a rebuttal, or even comfort. She simply said, "Then now is your chance to change." The professor closed his eyes, and when he opened them, something inside had visibly shifted. The arrogance was gone. The sharp edge in his voice had melted. He looked like a man who had spent a lifetime walking in circles, only to find the door he mocked was the one he always needed to enter. "I want to take the Shahada," he whispered. His voice shook. "I want to become a Muslim." The words didn't crash like thunder. They fell like tears. Soft. Heavy. Holy. One of the students dropped his pen. Another covered her mouth in shock. No one was prepared for this. And yet, somehow, it felt inevitable. Sophia stood slowly. She walked toward the front of the room. Each step felt wrapped in light. The professor looked at her, as if she carried something he'd never known he needed. Sophia placed her hand over her heart, then gently extended the other toward him. "Repeat after me," she said. "But only if you believe it in your heart." He nodded. A single tear fell down his cheek. Sophia spoke slowly. "I bear witness that there is no God but Allah," he echoed, voice breaking. "I bear witness that Muhammad is the messenger of Allah." It was done. A single prayer echoed inside 100 silent souls. And then, as if the moment needed no audience, the room remained still. No applause. No dramatic music. Just reverence. The professor sat down, weeping quietly. Students stared, not in disbelief, but in humility. It was not just a professor who had changed. It was the class itself. The same group that once mocked faith was now humbled by its presence. Sophia looked at him one more time. "I never wanted to win," she said. "I just wanted the truth to be heard." He nodded. "You did more than that. You brought me back to myself." Then, in the far back of the room, a girl stood. She had blonde hair, heavy eyeliner, and was known across campus for her boldness. No one had ever seen her show hesitation. But now she trembled. Her hand rose to her scarf, not a hijab, just a loose cotton wrap she had worn around her neck. Slowly, she lifted it over her head. "I don't know what this means yet," she said, voice trembling. "But I want to start." Another student stood. Then another. Sophia turned, stunned, as 5, then 6, students stood up. Not all wearing scarves. Not all ready to convert. But all awakening. It was as if something had been torn open in the walls of that classroom. And through the opening, a light had poured in that no one expected. The same room that had once echoed with laughter now held only truth. The professor looked around at the students rising. His face softened even more. "What's happening?" he asked softly. Sophia answered. "The hijab you once touched wasn't just cloth. It was a veil between ignorance and understanding. And today, that veil fell for all of you." He smiled, tears still glistening. "Then let's keep walking through." Sophia nodded, her face calm. Not victorious. Not triumphant. Just grateful. That day, a classroom became a mosque. Not in name, not in structure, but in light. And it all began, not with a textbook, not with a sermon, not even with a miracle, but with a question. And the courage to answer it. There was no professor in that room anymore. Not in the way the students had known him. The man who once challenged every faith-based student with surgical precision now sat among them, humbled, wiping away quiet tears. His black marker lay untouched on the edge of the podium, forgotten. His suit, once a symbol of control and order, now clung loosely to shoulders that no longer carried arrogance. He had removed his glasses. He no longer needed to see, he needed to feel. Sophia stood still. Not in shock, but in quiet awe. The transformation hadn't hit her like a wave. It had sunk in slowly, like the call of far piercing the last layer of sleep. Gradual. Gentle. Irresistible. Across the lecture hall, students were no longer scrolling their phones or half listening. Something sacred had just unfolded before them. And it wasn't just the professor's testimony that moved them. It was the invisible shift in the very atmosphere of the room. Sophia stepped back toward her seat, but before she sat, one more voice rose. "Wait," said a boy near the far left corner. Everyone turned. He was tall, athletic, one of the loud ones in earlier lectures. His voice used to carry mockery. Today, it carried hesitation. "My name's Brian," he said. "I'm not ready to become anything. But I feel like I've just seen something real. And I don't know what to do with it." Sophia met his eyes, not with pressure, but with compassion. "Start with honesty," she said. "Ask yourself what you're truly afraid of. Then find answers. That's how journeys begin." Brian nodded. His hand moved across his notebook, not to doodle, but to write something down. Then Chloe spoke up again. "You said something earlier, about not judging Islam by Muslims who don't follow it." Sophia nodded. "That hit me," Chloe said. "Because I've only ever seen Islam through news headlines, or through friends who didn't really know their own faith. I never realized how much I misunderstood. It makes me wonder how many other things I've judged wrongly in life." A ripple of emotion passed through the room. Sophia let it settle. Then said, "Sometimes we're so busy analyzing the world, we forget to analyze ourselves." And then it happened. The professor, now simply David Anderson, raised his hand slowly. "I need to say something." Sophia turned. He stood up again, but this time, there was no lecture in his posture. Just raw, trembling humanity. "I used to see religion as a weakness," he said. "A way to control people. I thought science and reason were all I needed. But today, I felt something I can't explain. Not in any book. Not in any theory." He looked around the room. "I felt peace. And I don't think I've ever known what that really meant." No one spoke. He continued. "I mocked people who prayed. Who covered. Who fasted. I thought I was above them. But I realize now, they were ahead of me. Their silence wasn't ignorance. It was strength I never had." Sophia remained silent, letting the moment carry itself. David looked at her directly. "And you," he said, voice cracking, "you didn't argue to win. You spoke like someone who wanted to heal." Sophia's voice was quiet. "That's what truth does." He nodded. "Then let me speak a final truth. To all of you." He turned to the class. "I can't go back to who I was. Not after today. And if you're feeling even a flicker of what I'm feeling, confusion, wonder, fear, awe, don't ignore it. Don't bury it in memes or jokes or Netflix. Sit with it. Let it wake something in you." The class sat stunned, holding on to every word. "I used to believe change was for the weak. But I've never felt stronger than I do now." Sophia finally spoke again. "Change is not weakness. Change is submission. Not to people, but to truth." A pause. And then, as if prompted by nothing but their own souls, 3 more students stood. A girl with an afro and rainbow earrings. A boy with a cross tattoo on his wrist. And a shy girl who had never spoken a single word in class. "I want to learn too," they each said in their own way. Sophia looked around. And it hit her. This wasn't a classroom anymore. This was a garden of awakening. A place where seeds had been planted, not with force, but with sincerity. The hijab they once mocked had become a flag of peace. The girl they laughed at had become their mirror. And the man who used to tear faith apart had become its living proof. One student finally asked the question that no one else had dared to voice yet. Sophia, what made you never give up? What kept you from walking away when we laughed at you? Sophia's eyes welled up. I remembered a verse. She whispered. So be patient. Indeed, the promise of Allah is truth. Qur'an 30:60. I knew, she said, that one day someone would listen. That even if one heart turned, every pain I endured would be worth it. And now? It wasn't just one. It was many. Some asking questions. Some lifting scarves. Some holding back tears they didn't yet understand. And one, who had just said the Shahida with trembling lips. Outside, the sun was beginning to set. Golden light poured through the high windows of the lecture hall, painting the room in warmth. It felt symbolic, as if the heavens themselves had softened. And as Sophia looked at her classmates, eyes wide, hearts open, she whispered under her breath a prayer no one heard but God. Ya Allah, guide them. I've done my part. Little did she know, the light she had kindled would now begin spreading on its own. And the battle she fought silently, for so long, had become a spark. One that would turn this classroom into a lighthouse for many. And it all began with a question. And the courage to answer it. A week had passed. But for those who had been in that room, it felt like time had broken into two halves, before that day, and after it. Conversations on campus had shifted. The usual gossip, the loud debates about politics, the hurried footsteps between classes, all now carried a different undertone. People whispered about what had happened in Professor Anderson's philosophy class. But they didn't whisper out of mockery. They whispered the way one speaks in a sacred place. Some still couldn't believe it. Others couldn't stop thinking about it. David Anderson, the man who had once claimed that religion was humanity's greatest weakness, had taken the Shahida in front of his entire class. Students who once mocked Sophia now looked for her between lectures. Some approached quietly. Others, still unsure, just nodded respectfully when they passed her. The white scarf she wore had become something more than cloth. It had become a reminder. Of courage. Of truth. Of a light that didn't shout, but whispered straight to the soul. In the cafeteria, on the benches outside, in the quiet corners of the library, students could be seen reading small copies of the Qur'an. Some held it awkwardly, unsure how to even turn its pages. But they read. And they pondered. Sophia watched all of this quietly. She never posted online about what happened. Never boasted. Never acted as if she had won something. Because she hadn't come to win. She had come to stand. One afternoon, as she exited the masjid on campus, she heard someone call her name. It was David, no longer Professor Anderson, in the way he used to be. He wore a simple gray sweater now, glasses tucked into the collar, and a calmness on his face that made him look 10 years younger. Sophia, he said, smiling. She returned the smile. Assalamu alaikum, David. Wa alaikum salam, he replied, still getting used to the words. They walked together toward a bench under a tree. The leaves above were slowly falling, not because of wind, but because the season itself had decided it was time for change. I want to thank you, he said. She shook her head gently. I did nothing special. He looked at her firmly. You did everything. You stood when I attacked. You answered when I mocked. You didn't fight me, you illuminated me. There was a moment of soft silence. David sighed. You know, I spent most of my life building walls around my heart. I thought knowledge was enough. But knowledge without humility is just noise. Sophia nodded slowly. Sometimes the greatest knowledge is to finally say, I don't know. He smiled. I said that for the first time in your presence. Another pause. Then he added, Do you know what moved me the most? It wasn't your logic, though you were brilliant. It wasn't even the Qur'an, though I've started reading it every night. Sophia tilted her head. Then what was it? It was your silence, he said. The way you didn't rush. The way you didn't retaliate. There was peace in you. And I realized that I had spent my entire life searching for that peace in books, awards, applause, and never found it. But you had it. And you never raised your voice once to prove it. Sophia's eyes glistened, but she held back her tears. Peace, she said, is what Islam means. He chuckled softly. Then I finally found Islam. Around them, the world continued. Cars honked in the distance, a dog barked somewhere, leaves crunched under the feet of passing students. But here, under the quiet tree, a deeper sound lingered, the sound of two hearts connected not by title, or culture, or age, but by truth. I spoke to the administration, David said. I've requested to step down from lecturing next semester. I want to take time to study. To really learn. Sophia blinked in surprise. You're stepping down? He nodded. For once, I want to be the student. Then, with a warm smile, he added, and I was hoping you might guide me. Sophia laughed softly, not from amusement, but from gratitude. We'll learn together, inshallah. As they sat quietly, a small group of students approached. Some from their class. Some who had only heard about what happened. One of them stepped forward. Sophia, the girl said, nervously adjusting a light scarf around her head. I just wanted you to know. I've started praying. I don't know all the Arabic yet, and I'm not very good at it, but I feel something every time I do. Sophia smiled. That's how it begins. Another boy added. I told my mom I wanted to visit a mosque. She cried. But I told her I'm not joining a cult, I'm just trying to find peace. David looked at them all, then whispered to Sophia. This is bigger than us. Sophia nodded. It always was. A small breeze passed through the tree. A few golden leaves floated down and landed near Sophia's feet. She looked at them, then up toward the sky, where soft white clouds drifted in slow harmony. This moment, this day, wasn't about a debate anymore. It wasn't about logic or history or proving who was right. It was about awakening. A ripple had started in one classroom. But its echo was now traveling far beyond it, into hearts, into homes, into questions that had never been asked before. One by one, people were beginning to look inward. Not to find religion, but to find meaning. And all of it had started with a single girl. A hijab. A question. And the courage to answer it with truth. Not anger. Not pride. Just light. And when the veil of misunderstanding lifted, the hearts underneath were ready to see. Because in the end, it wasn't just the professor who removed the hijab. It was ignorance itself. And when it did, the whole world embraced the truth.